little bit. Okay, everyone, welcome to the May 2023 Silicon Valley Engineering Leadership meeting. We're still trying to adapt to this hybrid world, and good news is we got everything wired up, and like last time it took longer, so now we're getting shorter every time. We're getting better, and we have audio and so on. So I want to thank one of our sponsors, my employer, Varian Medical Systems. They're the ones who let us use this building and the audio system and everything else. And we've had other sponsors in the past. Right now, today, our bank account balances are a bit low. That's why the food offerings here today are kind of minimal. But we've had more in the past and maybe more in the future. It all depends on the new sponsors. And what I'd like to do is hand the microphone over to our speaker tonight, Bill Lennon. And Bill, you're going to be talking to us mental health and team performance.
I like it. Cool. Thank you. This is awesome. Okay, so just total side note, as a recovering social anxiety sufferer, the fact that I'm not freaking out right now is amazing. I love it. So cool. Okay. Hi, my name's Bill. I've worked here in Silicon Valley in tech for 25 plus years. My teams have consistently done things people said were impossible, like over and over and over again. And I didn't know how come. I didn't know why my teams were able to do that. I didn't have the language. And I've had a lot of people ask me, like, teach us how you do this. 4 years ago, I met this amazing occupational therapist who worked in mental health. She was able to help me figure out how to have this conversation that we're having today. She put language to what I was doing. So I'd like, the point of this is to start a conversation about pragmatic tactics for enabling better performance in your teams, right? At the end of this, you should have a couple of tools available. And if I did my job well, you'll want more. I'd like you to just listen to this, see if there's any skills that come out that you resonate with. You're like, oh, I know that, or I've seen that. And at the end, if you want to know more, great, let's talk. Now, keyboard's huge. There we go. So quick agenda. I'll give it a little bit of backstory, kind of how we got here, the problems that we're addressing. The mental health angle on all this stuff, because that applies everywhere all the time. The kind of outcomes that we've been able to generate, why this works so well, the foundational principles, and then some sample implementations. So, origin story. I have to start by giving my dad a ton of credit, because when I was a kid, he told me that his job as a leader was to make his teams really successful. My dad's job was loading bombs on military airplanes in the Cold War and in Vietnam. And he always said that his role supporting his teams was what made them super effective. And that stuck in my head. He often told stories of simple things like buying long underwear for his teams when we were in the snowy north, checking on families of guys that were deployed when we were going through storms, and delivering coffee when there were 24-hour operations going on. When I started running teams, I was terrified because I didn't know how to be an effective leader. And because of that, I went researching, and I did a lot of research. At the moment, I'm someplace past 200 different inputs on my education. I've done dozens of workshops, and I've read hundreds of books that kind of bubbled up into this, right, to where I am today. And again, I've got to really give a shout out to Barbara Navarro, because she was the one that was able to actually put a language to the behaviors that I was doing, because I learned all this stuff somewhat unconsciously, and I definitely didn't know how to talk about it. So why this stuff matters, right? This is a leadership group, and so all these reasons should resonate with folks, whether you are currently leading or you want to be a leader, either way. Number one problem is our employee engagement is terrible. In 2022, only 15% of employees were actively engaged at work. The other 85% were either not engaged or they're actively disengaged. And that means productivity is horrible. That's a problem to be solved. The next part is mental health costs. Conservative estimates are that businesses lose more than $175 billion a year just in the US alone due to mental health costs. From another angle, employees that are struggling with their mental health, they take 5 times as many days off for mental health days as the people who aren't. And again, we're talking productivity problems, right? When you do that. The third thing, team churn. In 2022, a national survey found that 56% of employees were looking for a new job. And that means that 2.5 of you in this room, plus however many people are online, are actively looking. And that kind of reduces your productivity at work because you're focused on something else. The other thing is when you leave, the team loses institutional knowledge. And that really hurts for the people that stay behind, right? And also there's training ramp up time for the new people to come in. And again, we're talking productivity, and all those things are friction. I'm a serious pragmatist. I want highly productive teams. I want teams to work effectively, and I want consistent, repeatable processes. Good leadership should both improve team performance and make the CFO smile. That's the other driver, right? I want to check both of those boxes whenever I go and talk to the execs, because if I can, they will say yes to whatever budget I ask for. And it has to be more than just an emotional thing, right? Team's got to be happy. So the mental health side of this, I didn't start off thinking about mental health. It really didn't even realize the mental health implications of this until Barbara kind of dropped it on me, right? I didn't know that language, didn't understand that world, didn't understand that what I was doing was actually helping my teams out. The goal that I had was to just improve the team performance, and I didn't realize the overlap. What's interesting is shared problems. So most mental health problems start off when we feel powerless to create change. We feel powerless because we don't know what to do. Like that's the very core of it. I know this sounds really simple, but there's a small mountain of research spanning decades around mental health problems, people feeling powerless, and the skills gap, right, for them to become effective. What's interesting is that there's always something available to do in a given context. It's just that we don't know it, right? And we don't know to go hunting for somebody who actually knows how to solve a problem and can teach us how to do it ourselves. I've coached people ranging from VPs at Google and Tesla all the way down to fresh college grads. And the thing that I saw was a pattern match across all of them was they all lacked the same skills. So this is a consistent, repeatable problem that I saw. Didn't matter where people were in the org chart. Let's talk about stigma for a minute, because people tend to freak out about mental health a bit, and we'd like to solve that problem. The first thing is research is showing that more and more mental health challenges are not genetic in origin. They are a learned response to something, not something you're born with, right? I had social anxiety because I never learned growing up how to be really comfortable in a social context. And my parents never didn't, first of all, they didn't recognize it. And second of all, they didn't know how to teach me how to have a skills-based approach to being comfortable talking on a microphone in front of a group, right? Attached to that is that the emotional struggles, again, it's when we lack a consistent, repeatable process. And this is something that probably needs to be repeated multiple times. Emotional struggles are always a direct result of lacking skills and consistent, repeatable processes. The thing that Barbara was doing was she was helping people struggling with depression, anxiety, substance abuse, and self-harm. And the process that they got people out of those dark holes was literally teaching them skills and processes to get back in control of their life. And her big aha was, I was using the same skills for performance that she was using to get people out of a hole. Humans thrive on consistent, repeatable processes, and we take them for granted, right? But we don't look at our mental health through the process of, well, what do I need to learn to switch this thing from being hard to being easy? We don't ask that question. Clinical programs started using skills training about 30 years ago to help people that were struggling with depression, anxiety, and borderline personality disorder. Since then, that skills approach has expanded into PTSD, complex PTSD, ADHD, bipolar, and pretty much every other aspect of mental health problems. Now, the sad thing is, even though clinical programs are all focused in this, it has not trickled down to the standard therapist yet. I talk to therapists all the time about this, as does Barbara, and people are like, I had no idea, I didn't know you could do that. Again, I struggled for decades with social anxiety. The reason I can do this presentation right now is I started learning skills, and I babysat through the skills, and I did them in layers. I started off just starting conversations for 2 minutes, and then I moved into 10 minutes, and then half an hour, and then doing small presentations. And it's layers of recipes, one on top of the other. The last thing about mental health is that we radically underestimate how much interpersonal communication is a core part of our mental health. Humans are pack animals, and we need to communicate effectively with each other. And what you'll notice as we're going through this is I'll be continually talking about the communication aspects of how do you get your team to perform better, right? It's all about communication. So outcomes. Using this framework and skills, here's some of the things my teams have done. I took a 10-year-old team, they were very well baked, and got a 40% improvement in coding throughput in 6 months. This was the worst team in the company, and 6 months later, they were the best team in the company, and the VP of engineering said, I have no clue how you did that, but I need more. And I didn't know how to explain to him what I'd done. At a software as a service company, they gave me the customer service team. This approach works in a variety of contexts, right? They had 0 referenceable customers. In 3 months, we had 40% of the customers were referenceable, and these were large household name kind of companies. I went to another company, and in 4 months, built them a cash cow data product. We started with a 1-sentence idea, and it took us 2 months to recoup all the investment money up front. 6 years later, it was still running at $250,000 a month in revenue, and no one had ever touched the code. We did a software development project. We got it out in 8 months. Everybody said it would take us at least a year. It was really a good thing we got it out, because the guys that benefited from it, that's this company you probably heard of called Walmart. And on Black Friday, a month and a half after we got this out, their systems all crashed because they were overloaded, and we were able to handle all their social media traffic. And again, the execs wanted me to teach everybody else how I'd done it, and I didn't have the words to explain what I've been doing, right? When I was at Google, we had 100 people tell us that we couldn't solve this problem, that technically and legally it was impossible. We did it anyway, and turned out it was both technically and legally possible. And all this time, my teams have had roughly 0 churn, which is one of the huge value points for me in having high-performing teams, right? I like that consistency. So why does this work? There's one huge thing about why this works. It's psychological safety. And people undervalue psychological safety and how to get more of it in teams because they don't know how to do it, right? This is one of those things where you might want to be able to do more of it, but if you don't know how to make it happen, you're stuck, right? You're powerless. It would seem kind of obvious that when teams perform well, it's because they're willing to share wild ideas. A bunch of the reasons that my teams have done so well is because they were willing to speak and say things, and they knew going forward that they would have ownership of solutions, and they would be empowered, and that I would take care of them. The other thing is they collaborated incredibly well. Again, psychological safety allows this to happen. If you don't have psychological safety, then you're not going to share your thoughts with somebody, and that's a slowdown, right? When teams aren't performing well, the #1 reason, they're afraid of criticism. And that, it seems like it's a simple thing, but people just won't talk. And it's a really insidious thing where, you know, they're like, oh, this is too wild an idea, until one day it's a really conservative idea and they're still afraid to say it. And last but not least, I don't feel like we've ever been abused in our teams. We really haven't had freeloaders, which has been amazing, because that's a thing that really impacts teams. If they think that, you know, we're doing all the hard work and those guys aren't doing anything, we've never had that problem. So here's the 20,000-foot view of the principles to make all this stuff work, right? This is kind of how I operate. First of all, don't be sand in the machine. Leaders have an incredible amount of power for how their teams operate, and they oftentimes don't recognize that. And my model was, I've got to take 100% responsibility for the team's success. And starting with that, I had to make sure that I wasn't the one causing the problems, which meant I've got to unwind my own insecurities. I've got to solve my skills gaps. I've got to learn how to present and really improve my communication, because otherwise I'm actually causing slowdowns in the productivity of the team. The other thing is I have to give the team all the credit. So I have all the responsibility, they get all the credit. The second thing is I've got to get super curious. There are thousands of books and courses on self-awareness, distress tolerance, critical thinking, and interpersonal effectiveness. As I mentioned before, I'm well past the 200 mark on this stuff, and I'm always looking for new models, new techniques, new perspectives on how to make this stuff work better, because it's so core. Every time I find a better idea, I adopt it, right? Baby steps. Everything's incremental, and they're tiny steps to make things move forward. We overestimate what we can do in a day, but we underestimate what we can do in a year. I don't remember who said that quote, but it's always in the back of my head. My team's never changed overnight. It was just all these baby steps, and all of a sudden one day, they look back and we're like, "Holy cow, how did we do that?" Right? I spent a lot of time getting to know the individuals in my teams because I want to know their strengths, irrespective of what role they're in. I want to listen to their stories. I want to understand the points of friction, because different people have different points of friction, and it's a lot like peeling an onion. You just got to work your way down through the layers. There's no magic thing where everything's going to be out suddenly in front of you on a board. Also, you need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. As I mentioned, I was a shy introvert, really bad social anxiety, and I realized that being uncomfortable in service of my team was actually really, really valuable. At the first startup that I was at, despite my social anxiety, I became the demo guy because everybody else in the team had more insecurities than I did, which kind of blew my mind, but that's just the way it worked out, right? I also had to get uncomfortable and advocate for my team with the executives. And when I first started doing this, it was rough because I hadn't had practice. I didn't have a consistent, repeated process that I'd done over and over and over again where I knew I could change the execs' minds. The benefit of doing this and going to bat for the team, it raises their self-confidence. It raises their confidence in each other, and it raises their confidence in me. And again, this is all about building up psychological safety. You've got to be able to, that's the core of everything, right? The other thing is that my being willing to be uncomfortable meant there's a lot of doors that open for my teams because my peers just wouldn't go and have those conversations. And all of a sudden people were like, "Oh, can your team help with whatever crazy project somebody came up with?" And so that meant the team actually got to feed their own curiosity, do the interesting projects in the company. And last but not least, by far, we talk about recipes a lot. Everything we do is based on these stacks of small skills, and we put them together into a recipe to solve a specific kind of a problem. We oftentimes have ingredients that run across a bunch of recipes, just like you can use eggs in all kinds of things. You can use it in cake, you can use it in hamburgers. Oh, and you can make an omelet with it, right? It's still an egg. It just depends on the context you want to use it in. It's like using Lego also, right? But the recipes are really the contextual place of, oh, here's what I want to do here. Here's the recipe that I need to use. The beautiful thing about it is after you go through learning some number of recipes, you start being able to, just like a chef, put together your own recipes to solve your own problems. One of the ways that I think about this is object-oriented mental health, and because you're instantiating these skills in different ways. And I expect that makes sense to everybody here. Nobody's shaking their head going, "I don't know what that is." Okay, good, awesome. So recipes, a little bit more of a deep dive. These are consistent, repeatable processes, right? The recipe for baking a chocolate cake, it's always going to look the same if I take it out of the Betty Crocker cookbook, right? I'm always going to do the exact same thing to make that chocolate cake. Humans thrive on consistent, repeatable processes. We don't talk about this very much, but this is how we operate, right? You expect the controls in your car will always work the same. You can go from a Toyota to a Honda to a Mercedes to a Ferrari, and they all have a steering wheel and a gas pedal and a brake pedal and a gear shifter of some kind or other, and light switches and windshield wipers. And you can figure it out when you go from vehicle to vehicle because there's that consistency, right? You expect the light switches to all work the same, or even the Zoom logins. As a side note, by the way, if you or people on your team have a more adventurous or what's called a scout mindset, this is specific like way people's heads work. Scout mindsets are available because those people have a different fuzzy pattern match. This is a fairly new in terms of psychology world area of research, where there's people who just, they see the world a bit differently. They do fuzzy pattern matches, and they're very happy with problem solving. And their consistent repeatable processes are at a 20,000 foot view, not necessarily ground level. And if you have them on your team, they're awesome for problem solving. They will give you very creative thoughts, and they will put things together that the rest of the team won't necessarily see. Some examples of consistent repeatable processes that you guys will probably recognize. TCP/IP stack is an engineered, very consistent, repeatable process that gets data packets from here to there, even when there are problems out on the network, right? That's super consistent. Oral hygiene, right? You guys probably all brush your teeth and floss the exact same way every day, and you don't have to think about it because you've done 20, 30,000 reps, right? It doesn't change. You do the same thing every day. When I brush my teeth, I put a garbanzo bean sized bit of toothpaste on a toothbrush, and it's the same every single day. I have no idea how come I'm so consistent. VC pitches that win often are also very much the same kind of a pattern. If you notice those, you'll see there's this consistency across, especially when you go into a given investor. So what are the parts of a recipe? Somebody might be asking, right? So there's a very consistent set of things that go into recipes in terms of objects. The starting point is always the why. Why does this recipe matter? Simon Sinek does a great job of talking about why. I'm a huge fan of his work. We call this values and priorities. And if you're doing something or you want to do something, there's always going to be values and priorities involved. Otherwise, you're just not going to do it, right? If you find that you're not executing on recipes, then check the values and priorities, right? The next one is self-awareness and emotional regulation. This is the get comfortable being uncomfortable. You have to be able to understand your body, and you have to learn how to manage when stuff's uncomfortable. Because the first time you do a recipe, it's going to feel awkward. Like the first time you make a chocolate cake, it's probably going to feel awkward. I'm not a chef by any stretch of the imagination, but I know when I cook, the first time I do something, I'm always like, oh my God, I hope this comes out well. You know, if it tastes horrible, what's my backup plan? Distress tolerance is one of those foundational skills that you have to have at the beginning of a recipe. And as time goes on and you get more and more and more used to it, then you don't need it nearly as much. Kind of like for me when I learned to drive, right? When I first started driving, it was terrifying. Now I don't even think about it. You're gonna need to learn some skills. You're gonna need to be able to talk about them just like you would ingredients in cooking or APIs in something you're connected to with software, right? You need to understand the skill. There's two reasons. One, so you can use it yourself and know what's going on. And two, you can help coach other people in whatever it is, right? It's just like anything else in tech. You're coaching other people, how do they get ahead? Since we're talking about communication, you probably also benefit from a script. I script things in advance all the time. And I mean, this presentation is a script, right? Even though I'm not following exactly my speaker notes, I wrote these notes, thought about them, edited them, practiced them, and it gives me a foundation to work with, right? Every time I've ever done a presentation for an executive, I've had it scripted in advance, even if I walked in cold and I didn't have a computer with me. There's a couple of optional ingredients also in recipes. It depends on context. The first one is a time box. How long to do this thing for? When I started working on my social anxiety, I literally started at starting conversations in a 2-minute time box. And I used the baristas at Starbucks as my foil. I went in, ordered coffee, got the coffee, and then, so how's your day going? And they would tell me whatever, and I would say thank you and leave. And that was the 2-minute window. But that, after 2 weeks, I was comfortable with starting conversations. And I still use that opener all the time today. The second optional is critical thinking skills. And the reason that at Google, my team was able to do this impossible thing was we used our critical thinking skills to research all the other big companies and figure out that they were doing this thing that people inside Google didn't know was possible, right? No one had bothered to go look outside and go, how do those big guys do it, right? We happened to go look outside to figure it out because we thought somebody had been doing it. So here's a sample recipe that I use in my teams all the time. People want to be heard. This is how I found friction, first of all, in my teams. And I think that from a leadership perspective, if you can find and remove friction, that'll get you the fastest ROI your time will be most effectively spent, right? One-on-ones are a perfect time to be curious about team members, learn what makes them tick, find out their desires. It's also a really way to get data on behaviors so you can understand behavioral discrepancies. I noticed that I had people that would be really vulnerable with me and they would talk about anything. And when you put them in front of the team, they totally clam up. And so I wanted to undo their clam up in front of the team because I knew they were really smart and I wanted to get their thinking out in front of everybody else. That was incredibly valuable, right? There's an untapped potential in those shy people that you need the rest of the team to be able to have access to. This is behavioral espionage, is really a way to think about it. The other thing that I do in this particular recipe is what I call a reverse open door. HP used to call it management by walking around. And every week I purposely interrupt someone for a few minutes to ask their perspective on either a current or a future feature in something we're building, right? And I want to understand their thought process in this context. And I want to make sure in this conversation that I let them know that their input's valuable and I'm really grateful for it. I've got to actually thank them profusely. And also, just in case somebody was curious, I was really respectful of their time. I didn't just barge in when they were in flow. I made sure that it was someplace where they weren't madly typing on the keyboard. So what does this recipe look like? Well, so here's a skill stack that goes into there. So first of all, we got values and priorities. For me, improving my team performance is huge, right? That's the whole game for me. One of my first executives, I went to him and I was like, I don't have time to lead this team and write code at the same time, at the same level that I used to. How do I prioritize? And he said, stop writing code. Your job is to make the team effective. If you never write code ever again, I'll be really happy because your team will be super effective. And I said, holy cow, I never thought about that. And so I made the team really effective. You've got to understand what your driver is for your moving forward. The second one is distress tolerance. Again, in this one, you might be nervous hearing and asking your people on your team questions. And so you got to be able to control that. There's a bunch of knobs and levers for distress tolerance that you can use. One of the things I do is I make sure I get a good night's sleep beforehand. I do what's called long exhale breath before every meeting. Long exhale breath is inhale for count of 4, exhale for count of 8 to 12. It slows your heart rate down. And if you do that 5 or 6 times before the meeting, you're really calm, you're really relaxed, and you have relaxed body language. The next thing to do, and this is, again, emotional self-awareness and emotional regulation. The next one is a cluster of skills called GIVE. Communication is at least 55% nonverbal. And again, that's a big lever to either use or not use, right, in communication. It's one of those name skills that I use repeatedly in any kind of a communication. And it's an acronym for be gentle. You want to be aware of your body language and you want to communicate gently so that other people aren't intimidated. You want to be interested in the people and curious and learn from their experience, their perspective, their history, right? V is for validate. You want to validate their emotions. People, this is empathy with a different name attached to it, right? Whatever's going on, you want to be able to, yeah, that sounds awesome, or that sounds horrible. Imagine, I'd feel terrible if I was in that situation, right? And then a reminder to be gentle is have an easy manner. Again, it's about your body language. You don't want to come off as either threatening or aloof in this conversation. You want to be curious and interested, not critical, right? Very supportive. Doing this repeatedly, I learned a ton about my people. And that gave me the insight to help optimize the teams, right? The last stack is something called Dearman. This is an acronym for a cluster of skills that I don't really want to explain all of right now. But it's about presenting information in a way that the other people get it and find it interesting, useful, actionable, right? It's kind of another version of Einstein's quote that if you can't explain something to a 6-year-old, you don't really understand it well enough yourself. And so this is really the application of that in a business or whatever context, right? Here's another recipe. So the backstory on this one is I had a software team that hated their computers. They were 3 years old. They said they were too slow. And I said, well, why don't we get new ones? When I was new on the team. And they said, well, because we keep being told no. And so I said, well, I'll go in and I'll just see what we can do. And I went into the VP of Eng and said, hey, the team's complaining because their laptops are slow. We want new ones. And he said, no, they've all asked, but we can't give them to them because we just don't have the budget. And I said, oh, okay, thank you. And I went, talked to the team for a bit, did some math, pinged the VP back and said, hey, I've got some new information, but I think it'll change your mind about the laptops. And he said, well, you have nerve. I'll give you that. Come in and talk to me. And 15 minutes later, he said, you'll have laptops first thing in the morning. How come nobody told me this before? And I said, because I have a different communication skill set. I don't know. What I had done was I'd figured out how much man hours were being lost, and man hours are money, by the slow computers. And I was able to do the math and show him that in 3 months, they'd recoup the expenses. And everything after that obviously is gravy, right? And what he saw was, this is a cheap way to get software out the door faster, which makes every other team in the company and the customers happier. So the slow computers was the initial problem that was really frustrating my team, right? Almost always the argument against new tech is budget, because people go in with an emotional conversation to somebody whose mental model is money. It's not emotions, right? You got to give them a financial argument. So when I flipped it around to losing person hours, all of a sudden now they got money, and it's a whole